back in the Parliamentary Zoo.
There is a big elephant in the room. Obviously, that is one of the elephants in the room. You know, as I talked about one of the elephants in the room.
Where even the escapees reappear.
So, Phil, I'd like to invite you to come with me sometime and to sleep in a car together for a night.
Amid the general weirdness, this week has felt a little like a relentless telenovela.
We're not going to cycle through some desperate phase of saying, please come back.
Depending on who you listen to, the Liberal and National parties are headed for a lasting divorce. Or, especially for those worried about future three-cornered contests, an eventual reunion.
We're much more successful when we're united, and I think that's what we all need to reflect on.
In the limited polling that we've had since the split, while it's been terrible for both parties, it has been particularly bad for the National Party, who are looking like a rounding error in national polls.
The divisions, which look set to linger, are giving the government all the ammunition it needs.
I can't hear you back there. I can't hear you back there.
Order.
I can't hear you back there.
And leaving the opposition and its leader in a nowhere land of its own making.
Christopher Pyne, Bill Shorten, I'm delighted to have you back. I'm going to start with you, Christopher Pyne, if I may. What are we witnessing here with this rupture? Are these just the long aftershocks of a terrible election loss, or is this something more profound?
Well, I think actually it's a bit of both, Sarah. It's certainly the aftershocks of the trauma of the biggest defeat of the coalition party since 1943. So you'd expect that to have a pretty deep scar on anyone associated with it. But I also think it's the culmination of two parties that perhaps have not been respecting each one's political integrity. And what I mean by that is that the National Party does best when it focuses on policies and positions that win it seats in the country. And that means the Liberal Party needs to focus on the city. And right now, the Liberal Party has 8 out of 89 metropolitan seats as defined by the Electoral Commission, and it needs to be allowed to be itself. And a healthy coalition is the National Party representing country seats and the Liberal Party winning some regional seats, but concentrating particularly in the cities. That's how they form government. An unhealthy coalition is where one party tries to make the other one more like itself. And that is not the model that has given the coalition parties 65% of government since the Second World War.
Bill Shorten, if I can bring you in there, is this about interpersonal relationships or a deeper realignment that you are witnessing?
Well, I listened to Chris's optimism dance there, that it's just, if they would just each let them be themselves, everything will be happy. I need to get some of that optimism gin which you're consuming there, Christopher. I actually think that this is a complete restructure of conservative politics. It is happening everywhere in the world. The United States, the UK, Europe, Australia is not immune. And I think that the traditional centre-right conservative parties are being replaced by populist right-wing parties. This is a complete restructure. And whilst Labor's got plenty of challenges with Indies and Greens, and cost of living is the most important issue for Australians, I think we are witnessing a complete restructuring of conservative politics in Australia.
Now, that's a profound call, Christopher Pyne, but just in the shorter question, if you like, how much responsibility should the leaders in this case, before we get on to Bill Shorten's "The World is Changing," how much responsibility do the leaders bear, Susan Lee and David Littleproud, in this situation? Should they be able to hold this back?
Well, these tensions between the coalition parties have been existing for some time. This is not a new phenomenon. Of course, David Littleproud and Susan Lee are the current leaders, but we have for some time witnessed the National Party transitioning, if you like, from what it saw itself as the junior partner into a partner that is now sometimes wishing to go in its own direction and not necessarily follow the conventions that have governed the non-Labor side of politics. And one of those, of course, is shadow cabinet or cabinet solidarity. You can't be both in the tent but also have a leave pass to be out of the tent at the same time. I would say, however, of course, that I think the media's obsession with whether the Liberal and National parties are in coalition is not an obsession shared by the Australian public.
Now, hang on. I'm going to have to hang on you there, Christopher Pyne. It's not This is not a question of us being obsessed. We are merely observing this chaotic dance that's going on. We're not causing it. We're not prioritising it in a way that the public don't want. Where do you get that from?
Well, I think there are much more important issues that the public care about. And I think when I was in Canberra this week, a number of people told me that when the media are endlessly focusing on the coalition and whether they're together or not, people start changing the channel or turning off the radio because interest rates, inflation, anemic growth, rampant spending, worries about new taxes, this is what the Australian public are more interested in.
Mr Shorten?
I said it before the last election, Pyne for Liberal leader, because, Chris, you're right. The people hate seeing these internal ructions. You're right. But the problem is your old mob seem that they can't ever talk about anything else other than that. We can't pretend that it's not happening. I think it's a disaster for Conservative politics, what's happening. But you guys, your former team, because you would have stopped this if you'd been there, the infixer. The problem now is, Christopher, all they can do is can each other. You can't turn around a corner in Parliament without running into some coalition MP canning everyone else. I mean, the problem is, you're right, the public don't want this disunity, but your former colleagues they're in the sort of the pig pen of disunity and they can't leave.
Well, I do agree with you that it does appear to be something of an all-in brawl, but it will pass, in my view, and I don't agree with you that the right-wing populism is a political dynamic that will take hold in Australia. I say that because our preferential compulsory voting system pushes people back to the centre of the political spectrum in this country and has since 1901.
All right, let's go to that. Let's go to that, Bill Shorten. Right, just start and explain what you think what role One Nation is playing in what we're seeing.
Listen, I can't speak to One Nation's structure in all the states, and periodically they've had spikes in popularity, but these numbers are bigger than I've seen before. Now, Chris is right. Maybe it's just this is business as usual for the coalition, and we'll wheel John Howard out and he'll wave and everyone will form a group again. But what if that doesn't happen? What's plan B? And I have to say that, the current leaders are doing the best they can, but opposition's a hard job. And I don't know, apparently some of the others want the jobs, but they're not stepping forward. I mean, there seems to be a lack of unity, and in the meantime, One Nation is hoovering up the votes. Like, they're real. If you don't think that they're real, it's a bit like those Swedish tourists who, just before the tsunami, when the water flowed out, they went out to pick up starfish off the beach. I'm not sure this is a good time for the coalition, and they need to start thinking about the people rather than where they sit.
I love the sound of a Bill Shorten simile or metaphor incoming. That was unquestionably one of them. But I've got a question for you.
That one worked, though.
That one did work, unlike most of the others, indeed. So well done. One. Question, Christopher Pyne. Is it wise, however, for the Albanese government to gloat about what's happening, in particular in relation to the surge of One Nation? Are there dangers for the government in gloating over what's happening?
Well, definitely. There's a lot of dangers in the political cycle right now because if the two-party system that has dominated the federation for 125 years doesn't return to a sort of righted ship, it contains all sorts of dangers for government in this country. And Labor shouldn't be getting too pleased about this. One, you don't want a very bad opposition. A good government requires good opposition, and they know that. Otherwise, the government becomes complacent and at worst corrupt. Not that I see any evidence of that, but I think over time, you don't want a complacent government that thinks it can never lose. You do need to have the hot breath of competition on the neck of the government. So the opposition does need to get its act together, and I'm sure that it will. And secondly, the danger of Labor being complacent is that One Nation, in some areas, the closest they've come to winning seats in the lower house have been in Labor seats. They've been in the Hunter Valley. And here in South Australia, it's very early days for the state election, but really, in my view, the only lower house seat that One Nation might have a chance of winning would be Whyalla over in the Eyre Peninsula, because it has many of the same attributes of the Hunter Valley. But One Nation is not threatening in Liberal seats and has never threatened in Liberal seats, certainly at the federal level. It did win Queensland seats some time ago from the National Party. But the Labor Party would not want to assume that their voters in Northern Adelaide, for example, are all suddenly going to not vote One Nation. That's where One Nation gets a very high vote. And that's where the no vote for the Voice was the highest in South Australia.
All right, I'm going to park your opinion on that for the moment as a sort of business as usual pattern we've seen before from Christopher Pyne and fundamental realignment from Bill Shorten. We'll return to that, but just briefly in the time remaining, one of the weirder moments in the revelations in the Epstein files was an email from Steve Bannon to Jeffrey Epstein claiming he, Steve Bannon, had engineered Clive Palmer's advertising campaign against you, Bill Shorten. Palmer denies it. Do you accept that denial?
Well, it's wild, isn't it? I got a phone call Sunday, and apparently Steve Bannon, the Svengali of the Trumpian politics, is boasting to creepy Jeffrey Epstein, convicted pedophile, that he was the architect of the ad campaign. Now, I knew immediately that whether or not he was or wasn't, Clive Palmer wouldn't allow that to go by and, you know, take away from Clive's reputation. So Mr. Palmer rushed out and said, no, that's not true. He's never spoken to Steve Bannon. Then the next day, Mr. Palmer changed his version of events and said, actually, I've just remembered a 3 o'clock phone call, but that was Bannon congratulating me. And then he said, and then Mr. Palmer went on to say it was actually him and Matthias Cormann. Mr. Cormann then denied it. Listen, I don't know who said what, but they can't all be telling the truth.
That's for sure, and that feels like a good point to stop. We've just begun a beautiful conversation. I look forward to continuing it. It's a delight to have you back. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.